Listen closely, the wording is absolutely critical. He stated they now believe the son-in-law might be the prime suspect. Those exact words, the son-in-law may be the prime suspect. Right then, journalist Ashleigh Banfield gets a tip from a trusted law enforcement source, and that source reveals something that violently shifts the case's entire trajectory. Investigators might be turning their intense focus toward Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law. He isn't charged, arrested, or publicly named by any investigator on camera, but the intense scrutiny is undeniably real, and the direction it points completely changes the chilling feel of this case for everyone following it. Banfield remains incredibly careful with her words. She doesn't just hurl wild accusations. When she reports investigators may be focusing closer to home, she isn't guessing. She's passing along exactly what a law enforcement source told her directly. That crucial distinction matters. This isn't some cheap social media rumor. This is a journalist following the information wherever it leads, and right now, it leads straight towards someone inside the family circle. That single piece of information forces a deeply uncomfortable question that unnerves many. Why would investigators look towards someone Nancy knew and trusted, rather than an outside stranger? The natural instinct for anyone watching a grim case like this is to picture a violent intruder, someone who didn't belong, an unknown phantom. That comforting explanation feels easier to swallow because it keeps the danger at a safe distance. But investigators simply don't operate that way. When someone vanishes, the very first people examined are almost always those closest to the victim: family members, close friends, caregivers, people with daily access, people who intimately knew her schedule, habits, routines, and hidden vulnerabilities, people who could move silently through her space without raising any alarm. Being scrutinized is obviously not the same as being guilty. The son-in-law hasn't been charged, and no detective has publicly pointed to him as a suspect. But this sudden shift in attention is massively significant, because seasoned investigators don't redirect focus without a damn good reason. Something forced this case inward. Something made the detectives abandon the idea of a random stranger and start asking much tougher questions about someone dangerously close to Nancy Guthrie. When that happens in a missing persons case, the investigation's entire emotional landscape violently changes. It suddenly stops feeling like a purely random act. It starts feeling deeply personal, chillingly deliberate, and cold-bloodedly calculated, the exact kind of sinister act, requiring intimate knowledge of the house, of the frail 84-year-old woman living inside, knowing exactly what she could and couldn't physically do on her own. She is elderly, struggles with mobility, and couldn't simply wander out of her home unnoticed to travel long distances unassisted. That harsh physical reality anchors every theory investigators are working with. If she actually left that house, she didn't leave alone. Someone facilitated that eerie departure, meaning somebody knows more. The silent house itself begins revealing the story. Chilling reports indicate blood was discovered near the front entrance, while the back door was left wide open. Security cameras on the property were allegedly smashed or entirely missing. Each of those eerie details, taken strictly alone, might mean nothing, but together, they begin painting a disturbing picture of a scene that didn't just happen by accident. Blood found near an entrance strongly suggests a violent struggle occurred. An open back door raises intense questions. Was it recklessly left open by someone fleeing in a panic, or deliberately staged by someone wanting it to look a certain way? Missing or damaged cameras are perhaps the most deeply troubling detail, because security cameras don't just destroy themselves. If they were forcefully removed or destroyed right before Nancy vanished, that undeniably points to cold calculation. It points towards someone who fully understood what those lenses could capture, making a deliberate decision to strictly prevent them from recording anything. Who else would know exactly where those cameras were positioned? Who understood the property's layout intimately enough to identify which devices needed to be blinded before anything else happened? Who could casually walk through that home without attracting the slightest suspicion from Nancy or anyone else lurking nearby? These are the grueling questions investigators are currently asking. They aren't answering them publicly, as the chilling case remains highly active and forensic evidence is still being processed. But the investigation's entire frame has ominously shifted, and Banfield's explosive reporting makes that shift brutally visible to the public for the first time. The case is no longer treated as a random tragedy striking Nancy from the outside. It's now being intensely examined as something sinister that may have happened from deep within her own world, from inside her own home, within the tight circle of people she depended on and trusted most. That forms an entirely different, profoundly unsettling kind of investigation, and it demands a much harsher set of questions than anyone was genuinely prepared to ask at the beginning. The security cameras are totally gone or deliberately damaged. The exact murky details remain unclear, but detectives know for certain that the devices meant to capture activity at Nancy Guthrie's property aren't providing the crucial answers they should. In a tense case where every single second of footage matters, that glaring absence is absolutely deafening. Cameras don't just unscrew themselves or randomly malfunction to conveniently erase crucial evidence at the exact terrifying moment a person disappears. When surveillance equipment at a crime scene is smashed or missing, seasoned investigators treat that as hard information, not as mere bad luck or coincidence, but as critical information. The chilling question that naturally follows is simple yet heavy. Who exactly knew where those cameras were positioned? Not in some vague general sense, but specifically, precisely. Who thoroughly understood the exact angles they covered, the critical blind spots they missed, and what they were fully capable of capturing on any given, deadly night? That high level of intimate knowledge simply doesn't belong to a stranger. A stranger doesn't blindly walk onto an unfamiliar property and instantly identify which recording devices must be neutralized before anything else goes down. That dangerous kind of knowledge solely belongs to someone familiar, someone who had been inside that home repeatedly, someone who had casually walked those rooms, studied those walls, and understood the layout well enough to glide through it confidently in the dark. Investigators aren't releasing specific details about what they uncovered, or failed to find, on any salvaged footage. But the sheer, undeniable fact that these cameras appear to have been deliberately tampered with tells its own incredibly sinister story. It strongly suggests whoever was involved in Nancy's disappearance wasn't operating impulsively. There was cold, calculated thought behind it. There was dark preparation. Someone staked out the property ahead of time and made ruthless decisions about what strictly needed to happen before Nancy could be secretly moved, or harmed, or taken. That chilling word preparation completely changes the crushing weight of everything else. A spontaneous crime leaves behind rampant chaos, fingerprints in unexpected places, items violently knocked over and left exactly where they fell, an open door nobody ever planned for. But a meticulously prepared crime looks radically different. It looks cleaner in some ways, and far more deliberate in others. The pooling blood near the front entrance, the mysteriously open back door, the missing cameras. When all those haunting details are placed next to each other and viewed through the cold lens of preparation, they stop looking like a chaotic accident, and start looking exactly like a scene that was artificially constructed, arranged, and staged to purposely point investigators in a false direction serving someone's sick agenda. Staging is a twisted concept that law enforcement takes incredibly seriously. When a crime scene appears deliberately altered after the fact, investigators intensely look at who had the time, access, and specific knowledge to change it. A stranger rushing blindly through an unfamiliar home in the chaotic middle of a crime doesn't stop to carefully think about staging, but someone who intimately knew that property, who had ample time to plot and plan, who fully understood exactly what investigators would look for upon arrival. That person might. None of this is officially confirmed, none of this has been publicly stated by detectives, but the emerging evidence surfaces a chilling scene that raises even more disturbing questions the longer it is examined. Now, add Nancy's fragile physical condition to that dark picture. She is 84 years old. Her mobility is severely limited. She cannot walk long distances without immense difficulty. She cannot drive undetected. And she absolutely cannot simply vanish on her own. Every seasoned investigator working this case understands her sudden disappearance required assistance. It required a vehicle, and it required someone physically capable of forcibly moving her, and it required someone who could pull all of that off without being spotted by watchful neighbors, passing drivers, or absolutely anyone else in a position to report what they saw. That is a massive operational challenge. Moving an elderly woman entirely undetected isn't something that happens easily or quickly. It requires precise, intimate knowledge of the area, it requires flawless timing, and it requires understanding exactly when the property would be dead quiet, when neighbors would be tucked inside their homes, and when the nearby roads would carry the absolute least amount of traffic. Again, that chilling level of calculated planning points sharply away from a random stranger and directly towards someone with intimate, inside familiarity of Nancy's entire world. Then comes the vehicle. Banfield reports a family-connected vehicle was suddenly seized into evidence by relentless investigators. That explosive development isn't just some small detail buried inside a longer story. It is a massive turning point. Up until that very moment, the grim case existed largely in the murky space of swirling theories and questions. The vehicle shatters that. It thrusts the investigation from what might have happened straight into the hard territory of physical, tangible evidence that can be rigorously tested, deeply analyzed, and locked onto a strict timeline. Vehicles secretly hold information long after the people inside them foolishly believe that information is completely gone. Investigators can extract DNA from hidden surfaces most people would never even think to wipe down. They can hunt down trace evidence, microscopic fibers, soil, and hair transferred during violent contact lasting only mere seconds. They can rip location data straight from onboard systems that secretly recorded every single route the vehicle ever traveled, and every hidden place it ever stopped. They can tear apart the interior hunting for desperate signs of recent cleaning, indicating someone frantically tried to scrub away something from those surfaces after the terrifying fact. Obsessive, excessive cleaning inside any vehicle, particularly in the dark context of a missing persons case, is itself treated as highly suspicious evidence. The glaring fact that this specific vehicle had a direct family connection makes its sudden seizure profoundly significant. Investigators don't just casually impound vehicles. The strict process demands heavy justification. It legally requires investigators to truly believe, based heavily on what they already secretly know, that the vehicle undeniably contains crucial material relevant to the case. Something lurking in the information they had already meticulously gathered pointed them directly toward that specific vehicle, and that something originated from deep within the family's orbit. For everyone watching this unsettling case from the outside, the vehicle seizure is the exact moment the investigation becomes undeniably real. This is no longer a gentle situation where polite investigators are simply asking routine questions and casually reviewing grainy surveillance footage from nearby local businesses. They are now holding critical physical evidence. They are ruthlessly processing it, and whatever dark secrets that evidence reveals will either brutally narrow their intense focus further, or rip open terrifying new directions nobody has even publicly considered yet. The case has violently shifted, the entire investigation has pivoted, and the chilling direction it is moving is straight inward, directly toward the very people closest to Nancy Guthrie, toward the sprawling property where she lived, and toward the damning evidence potentially left behind by someone arrogant enough to believe they had covered their tracks completely. Then, the ransom messages suddenly drop and instantly complicate everything. Shocking reports surface of encrypted emails sent with aggressive demands attached. Bitcoin is explicitly mentioned, demanding a specific amount with a highly specific set of strict instructions. On the surface, it reads exactly like a desperate kidnapping case. Someone ruthlessly has Nancy, someone demands cold money in exchange for her safe return. The panicked family should just pay, and she safely comes home. But seasoned investigators absolutely do not accept that convenient framing at face value. They simply cannot afford to. In grim cases involving missing elderly victims, sudden ransom demands are heavily examined with extreme, biting skepticism, not because they are entirely impossible, but because they are so frequently weaponized as clever misdirection. Someone desperately wanting investigators to chase a wild kidnapping theory is someone who massively benefits from investigators totally ignoring everything else. And by this critical point in the terrifying case, those investigators are already looking very, very closely somewhere else entirely. The glaring questions aggressively surrounding the sudden ransom angle stack up dangerously fast. Were these chilling messages actually sent by the monster who has Nancy? Or were they sent by someone desperately attempting to create sheer confusion and buy critical time? Were they a genuine, frantic communication from a real kidnapper, or a sick, calculated performance perfectly designed to inject crippling doubt into a tightening investigation that was already closing in around a much smaller, familiar circle of people? Bitcoin is definitely not a random choice. It is a shadow currency, specifically selected by calculating criminals who desperately want transactions to remain nearly impossible to trace. The person or people who deliberately included Bitcoin in these heavy demands completely understood that fact. They fully knew what it meant to demand payment in a digital form that never passes through traditional banking systems, absolutely does not generate the kind of damning paper trail that federal investigators can track easily, and crucially, never requires anyone to show their face or reveal their true identity during the shady exchange. That is categorically not the reckless behavior of someone acting on raw impulse. That is the cold-blooded behavior of someone who thought incredibly carefully about how to safely receive the money without ever being caught taking it. Investigators treat this explosive ransom angle as just one dangerous thread among many. They don't quickly dismiss it. They certainly don't confirm it. They pull it meticulously and watch where it leads. If the demands were sent by a genuine kidnapper, the digital evidence will eventually, inevitably support that. Cellular phone records can be tracked down, burner email accounts can be located and unmasked, and permanent digital footprints always exist, even when the arrogant person leaving them falsely believes they have totally disappeared into the dark. If the terrifying messages were completely fabricated, that sick fabrication itself will also leave undeniable traces. Elite investigators are highly trained to easily spot the critical difference between a legitimate ransom demand and a fake one artificially constructed just to look real. And while that intense digital forensics work is happening, the entire rest of the investigation continues aggressively surging forward on every single other front simultaneously. Phone records are being ruthlessly reviewed. Every single call made to and from Nancy's number in the crucial days and dark hours before she vanished is being forensically examined. Every call made by the very people closest to her during that exact same shrinking window is being fiercely scrutinized. Investigators are rapidly building an ironclad timeline minute by excruciating minute if strictly necessary that perfectly maps where people claimed they were directly against where their digital phones actually were hiding. Cell tower data does not lie. and it absolutely never forgets. It permanently records a device's true location with terrifying precision, making it nearly impossible for someone to falsely claim they were safely in one place when their phone was actively pinging a tower somewhere else entirely. But digital evidence extends far beyond just phone records. Personal computers, tablets, and smart devices lurking inside the home can silently hold damning information about exactly what was searched, what was frantically deleted, and when. Deleted files are not always truly gone. Relentless investigators equipped with the right cyber tools can easily recover buried data that someone foolishly believed they had permanently destroyed. Hidden search histories can devastatingly reveal whether someone was quietly researching sinister topics directly relevant to the grim case in the quiet days right before Nancy completely disappeared. Financial records can expose whether any highly unusual transactions occurred right around the time she went missing. Every single digital surface in the lives of the people closest to Nancy suddenly becomes a critical source of information. Intense witness interviews are ongoing. Neighbors who might have seen something without realizing its dark significance are being interrogated again. Anyone who had contact with Nancy in the final days before she vanished is being asked grueling, detailed questions about her exact state of mind, her behavior, and whether anything seemed slightly off or dangerously wrong. Sometimes, the absolute most important detail in a missing persons case comes from someone who didn't even think what they saw was worth mentioning. A strange car parked somewhere unusual, a solitary light left on at an unexpected hour, or a conversation that felt slightly off. Relentless investigators collect every piece of it and hunt for the hidden pattern underneath. Crucial forensic evidence from the scene is actively being processed. The chilling blood found near the front entrance has been meticulously collected and submitted for rigorous analysis. DNA testing will definitively determine whose blood it is, and whether it directly connects to anyone already lurking inside the investigation. That explosive result alone could violently change the direction of absolutely everything. If the blood strictly belongs to Nancy, it tells one tragic story. If it belongs to someone else entirely, it tells a very different, much darker one. The vehicle seized into evidence continues to be ruthlessly examined. Every single surface is being forensically processed, every microscopic fiber, every stray hair, every single trace of foreign material that doesn't belong, is being meticulously identified and precisely catalogued. Raw location data from the vehicle's onboard computer systems is being ripped out and heavily compared against the ironclad timeline investigators are rapidly constructing. If that specific vehicle went anywhere significant in the dark hours surrounding Nancy's disappearance, investigators will absolutely know about it. All of this exhaustive work points firmly toward a single, unavoidable destination. The chilling truth of what actually happened to Nancy Guthrie isn't hidden forever beyond reach. It exists somewhere deep inside the hard evidence that has already been meticulously collected. It exists inside the massive digital records currently being reviewed. It exists inside the undeniable forensic results that are still being rigorously processed. Investigators aren't just working with nothing. They are aggressively working with a rapidly growing mountain of material that is quietly, lethally narrowing the shrinking space between what is completely unknown and what will eventually become brutally undeniable. What they absolutely haven't done is say any of it publicly. The tense case remains highly active. Formal charges haven't been filed, no shocking arrest has been made, and the son-in-law hasn't been officially named as a definitive suspect by anyone in law enforcement. But the relentless investigation is moving, and it's moving with terrifying purpose. The exact direction it continues to confidently travel is inward, directly toward the very people who were present, toward the very property where Nancy lived, and heavily toward the buried evidence that someone arrogantly believed would never be found. If seasoned investigators are looking this intensely closely at the people nearest to Nancy Guthrie, something massive caused that dramatic shift. Something they uncovered, something they forensically tested, something they undeniably confirmed, forcefully dragged their attention completely away from the outside world, and placed it firmly inside the tight circle of people she trusted most. The chilling answer to where Nancy is and exactly what happened to her may have been hiding in plain sight from the very dark beginning, and the specific people who know the terrifying truth about that night are rapidly running out of dark places to hide it.